Please join me in welcoming Jim Carafano. Jim?
So we're very famous at Heritage for always starting late but ending on time. We're actually starting on time, which is very unusual. But is it really? Thank God for that, because I don't. Yeah, I would hate for to break a tradition here. So there's two reasons why I'm very excited that John is here. So the second one is, who is John? I'll get to that in a second. But the first one is, as you would think, is the Heritage Foundation is focused on, you name it, what's going on in Syria, healthcare, what is Russia up to, what's China doing? I mean, there's not an issue going on in the world today that we don't care about. So why do we care about the American Revolution? Well, 99.9% of the big problems in this town are people problems. So I can't tell you how many meetings in and out of government, and even here where they say, well, let's change the wiring diagram, let's have this program and that program. And the problem is the people that are trying to solve this problem don't have the skills, the knowledge, and the attributes to get the job done. Well, that's fine, but how can we change the wiring diagram? Whatever. So leadership is the biggest part of our problems. And when somebody has something cogent and important and useful to say about leading, then I stop and take notice. And I don't care if it was leadership in the American Revolution or if it's the guy that's running Walmart today, is human beings are the most valuable resource in the universe. And anything that mobilizes that resource and makes it better is extreme value added. And so the topic of leadership is always relevant. And it should be at any institution that's serious about talking about public policy. So yeah, this is a place where we should be talking about leadership. And that's why I'm excited to have John here, because he's written a book that has interesting and important things to say. And just very quickly, the second reason why I'm excited to have John here is because it's John. I'm not going to give you a formal bio, but look, he is, I think in many ways, we're West Point classmates, and he's emblematic of everything that's great about our class. There are so many people in our class that I am so proud to know, and so many of them are the same guy in the sense that they are truly Renaissance people who have done so many things in so many different walks of life and managed to bring all those things together and continue to give back and extraordinary service to this country, even at our advanced and decrepit age. John is a soldier, he's a scholar, he has written fascinating and entertaining fiction, he is an entrepreneur, he's a tech innovator, he's done all these things in his life, and he's always managed to weave them together to create this whole that is so much larger than the sum of the parts. So to hear him, kind of a guy with his experience and background and diversity of perspectives, kind of turn the spotlight on leadership, it to me is very, very exciting. So I think we have a great opportunity. So John will talk for a bit, and then we'll open it to Q&A. And so the only thing I would ask is, when we get to the Q&A period, if you have a question, if you'd raise your hand and wait to be recognized, and then if you would wait for the microphone, so the folks that are listening online, and then the folks that see this later in the archive, they'll be able to hear the question. So if you would wait for the microphone, and if you just state your name and affiliation and ask your question, and then I promise you we will end promptly. Actually, I guess since the clock is whatever, we'll actually end on time. So with that, please join me in welcoming John Antal.
Well, first, it's a great honor to be here with all of you, and thank you for taking your time to come and listen. I hope that before you finish, when you leave today, you'll leave here thinking that it was worth it, and that's my goal. First, I want to thank the Heritage Foundation and Dr. James Carafano. I'll tell you what, the opportunity to speak here is just fantastic. Thank you so much. I also want to thank my publisher, Casemate, and other folks that helped me with this book. No book is done by yourself. It takes a team of folks to read it, and some of those here in the audience, friends of mine who helped me review it and pointed out all my errors, and I really appreciate that. Let me tell you, first of all, why should you care about listening to anything I say? Well, first, I'm going to talk about my book and about 7 leadership lessons of the American Revolution, but I'm really going to talk to you about leadership, and I think that what will happen today is that you'll have an opportunity to raise your leadership quotient by taking in some of the things I'll talk about. And I use the American Revolution and all our leaders in many of the leaders in the American Revolution that I admire, as the metaphor for talking about that leadership. First of all, that's me. All right, so I was an infant once, but I got out of the infantry as fast as I could, and I got into the cavalry. And I went to West Point, and I did the Airborne Ranger thing, and I was a tank officer in Germany back in the land before time when we had a Cold War, if anybody remembers that. And I was there in the Kuwaiti thing for a while, and had a chance to, great honor, to lead American soldiers in Korea as a tank battalion commander on the DMZ. And that picture right there is some of my greatest heroes in life. And the funny one, the sergeant major there that is standing just to my left, who also has the distinguished haircut. When I would walk into the motor pool sometimes, people would think that I was him, and they would say, "Hello, Sergeant Major," and I'd say, "Thank you." And he would walk at my side, and they would say, "Hello, sir," and try to salute him, and says, "Damn it, I'm not an officer," So, I'm a Sergeant Major. So he was a great guy, great soldier. And I was trained and worked with some other great Americans. I had an opportunity to serve time in the Pentagon and do other things. General Dempsey and I, when he was a colonel, I was in the same office while he was there. Then I retired from the Army after commanding a cavalry regiment and doing some other things, and went to work for Microsoft for a year, and then started making mass-market video games. Yes, believe it or not. So I had a chance then to go all over the world. Basically, I made video games that were based on kind of the Band of Brothers, only that was in a video game. So you were able to follow the path of a paratrooper in World War II, and this gave me an opportunity to travel around the world and go to battlefields in France and places like that. In fact, I was just in Iwo Jima this last March, escorting veterans from World War II who had fought in the Battle of Iwo Jima there. Great honor. Had an opportunity to do some things for the History Channel. Had an opportunity to go to Israel a couple of times. Went to Afghanistan in 2008, visited the troops and did some things. And now what I do is I still have business and many other businesses that I work in, but I'm also teaching and coaching and mentoring ROTC cadets in the North Texas area. We're very proud of our program. We have a leadership program where we train and teach ROTC cadets leadership. We fund it ourselves, so I help fund it, and we take them on 4 leadership and a movie events a year and 2 battlefield staff rides a year to Vicksburg. And they're just great events. And this is a picture of the latest one that just happened this last September. And so even though you're an old guy, like Jim was saying, you can still give back if you want to find a way. So we call this passing the torch, and this is our way to pass to the next generation of leaders some of the things that we hope we learned. And we also are going to take 5 cadets from North Texas to Normandy next year. And we're funding that whole program, and they have no expenses. And we fund them and take them for a week to Normandy to the D-Day battlefields. So it's a really neat program, and it shows that you can do stuff if you want to, even if there isn't an official program initially. We created it. And this is, again, we're from Texas, so we're proud of that, and this is at the Texas Monument at Vicksburg. So this is my hero. These are my values: loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, personal courage. This is who I wish was president. That's my home in Texas when there's snow, which is amazing because there isn't that much snow in Texas. And that's my reason for living. And she's the love of my life, and I'm just honored to be her husband. So let's talk about leadership, and let's talk about something we can all take away from this about leadership. Now, as you know, I wrote this book about the American Revolution, about leadership in the American Revolution, because I wanted to go back to our roots, and I think there's a lot to be said for that right now in our nation. We need to go back and think about how we were started as a nation, how we were able to survive, and why we're almost always 5 minutes to midnight or 3 seconds to midnight to losing our liberty. Over and over again in the history of America, the history of our republic, we've been very close to losing it. And it's important for us to go back and see how other folks got through very tough times. So, American Revolution, and this is going to be interactive. You get points if you know who this person is. So I'm going to ask you a question, and you're going to tell me if you know who this is. Who knows who this is? Raise your hand. Who is it, sir? Absolutely right. Well done. Normally I have to give people, a couple of hints like beer or something, and they get it. But that's Sam Adams. And let me tell you why Sam Adams is in the book. A leader chooses courage. This is not a small thing. Fear is a reaction. Courage is a decision. Everybody gets afraid. I've been afraid many times in my life, and I had to choose to be courageous. Sam Adams did that. He chose to be courageous. He stood up to Governor Hutchinson. He talked about all the Stamp Act and the sugar tax and the coercive acts and all those things and forced the British to try to understand Americans better and try to give us our liberties back. And then when that couldn't happen, he became the father of the revolution. He became the man who organized the Sons of Liberty, who started the letters of correspondence and got people talking about why we should have liberty and why we were different and why we should not be a member of the part of the British Empire anymore, how we had gone beyond that in this nation, and how Americans needed to get together to become a free and independent country. A leader chooses courage. Who is this guy? Excellent. Excellent. Very good. Henry Knox. Henry Knox is a story that you need to know and tell your children and grandchildren. If you don't have children and grandchildren, look forward to it. I'll tell you, this guy is amazing. Now, he is not your normal Hollywood action figure. This guy was, quite frankly, fat. He was about 6 feet tall, but he weighed over 250 pounds. They usually say 250 pounds, so that's being kind. He was probably about 280 or 290. But he was amazing. Now, do you know who started the first Starbucks in America? Henry Knox. Henry Knox started the first Starbucks. And it's kind of amazing. Now, they didn't call it Starbucks. It was called Henry Knox's bookstore. But this is what happened. When he was young, his father died, 12 years old. So he was apprenticed to a printer. He learned the printing trade, and he became a master printer, and he realized the business, and he had a brain, and he read every book in the printing shop. He self-taught himself. He learned how to do all sorts of things by reading books. He loved the military, and he read every book he could on the military, and he studied in particular how to do cannon drill and everything he could about artillery. And all those books, of course, came from England. So he started his own shop, and at age 20, he had his own coffee shop, tea shop, bookstore, a Starbucks, in Boston. He was making good money doing that. And he was actually engaged to one of the fine ladies of Boston, whose father was a staunch supporter of the British Empire. And so he not only had a problem when he was dating Lucy, the love of his life, in the fact that the father hated him, but he was also an entrepreneur who was in Boston doing all this, and then suddenly the revolution comes. He witnessed the Boston Massacre in 1770. He saw that happen. He became one of the members of the Sons of Liberty. He practiced with his militia in Boston Square, and was renowned as one of the better drillers and one of the better leaders of this small band of militia that quite frankly didn't have any experience in fighting at all. And then Lexington and Concord happened, and of course he rallied to the Patriot cause. And Boston then was filled with British soldiers, because after the British had gone to Lexington and Concord, and we had fought them, and they had marched 17 miles back from Concord, and we'd sniped and shot at them all the way along the way, where they lost about 70 soldiers. They all held up in Boston town, and they burned most of the Patriot stores, including his store, and destroyed it. And he fought with the Patriots at Bunker Hill several weeks later, when they got on Bunker Hill and fought actually at Breed's Hill, but the battle's known as Bunker Hill. And he was there leading his militia as the British came up 4 times and tried to storm that hill. And they consistently shot at them and drove them down until finally the Patriots ran out of ammunition, and they had no bayonets. So when General Howe led the final charge up the hill, he charged with bayonet and drove the Americans off. Henry Knox was there, but that's not why he's so famous and why you should know him. He's 25 years old now, 1775. Washington has finally been appointed the commander of the fledgling American army. There's about 30,000 to 50,000, depending on how you count and what week it was, because most of these guys would go home on the weekend, who are right now around Boston, sieging Boston with the British Army in Boston. So in America, the only place the British are really in strength is Boston. And Washington can't take the town because he has no cannon. He has only a few guns. And if he tries to storm Boston with infantry, the losses will be incredible. And the British won't attack, because after they've lost so many men in Bunker Hill, that they never again wanted to face the American riflemen behind fixed fortifications unless it was there was no other way out. So Henry Knox, 25 years old, a colonel of militia who really isn't even a colonel, goes up to Washington and says, "Sir, I got a plan. I just read that Ethan Allen and Benedict Arnold, who was a hero at this point in the American Revolution, took Fort Ticonderoga, and all the cannon in North America that we want are in Fort Ticonderoga. I'll go get them." And Washington says, "Great idea. Go. Let me give you some money." So he writes a little letter, puts in a letter there, says that the guys in New York should help him. And Henry Knox runs off in the middle of the night, 25 years old, with his brother. Two guys on horseback. Fort Ticonderoga is 350 miles away. There are no main roads to Fort Ticonderoga. There's no direct path. There's 16-ton plus of cannon and ammunition up at Fort Ticonderoga that he's going to pull back. And he does it. He does it. And that's kind of amazing. And the story of him doing that is incredible. Now, he learned long ago that you have to learn how to follow before you can lead. And what the neat thing about Henry Knox is he was determined to get this job done. One of the things that you have to do as a leader is that you have to be the kind of leader that you want to have as a follower. If you are a follower of someone and you're always whining and you're cynical and you say, "Oh, the job can't get done, it's too hard, things are too difficult," that's the person on your team that is always a problem. Who do you want on your team? You want someone on your team who's going to say, "I'll try. I can do it," or at least I'll give it the best shot I can. Here's how we could do it. Here's what we could do to get the job done. So really important to understand that you should be the kind of person that you want to have on your team. And Knox was one of those kind of guys. He was also a guy that was determined to succeed. But he went out and he showed Washington that he could follow instructions. He also showed Washington that he could go out and do the job. And because of that, he was able to bring all of those cannon and what he called the Great Noble Train of Artillery down from Fort Ticonderoga, across roads and across no roads and across places where there were no crossings in the river. At one point in the river crossing, the ice was too thin to bring cannon across. So what do? Well, this guy was smart. He said, "Okay, we'll wait until night." And at night, he drilled holes in the water. The water came up. It froze because it was colder at night. In the morning, right before the sun came up, the ice was thicker, and they moved across. An amazing guy. He got the cannon in finally by March of 1776. And when he got those cannon in, he then immediately worked to get those cannon up on Dorchester Heights. And as they did, those cannon appeared. The British saw suddenly guns surrounding Boston Harbor, and they knew that the fleet was going to leave because the fleet was not going to stay there with all the cannon pointing at them. So Washington did not have enough ammunition to load those cannons and fire those cannons more than 3 or 4 shots. The British didn't know that. So all these cannons showed up. We bluffed the British out of Boston. The Boston meet with Washington and say, "All right, we won't burn your stinking town if you let us go." And Washington said, "Yes, go ahead and go." So they got on their ships and they went to Nova Scotia. And at this point, there was no significant force in the United States, in the colonies, in the 13 colonies, in anywhere really in North America. They had all moved to Nova Scotia. So right now, America was free. The colonies were free. And because of Henry Knox getting the guns there, because of his determination and his ability to do this and getting there, he then enabled the Declaration of Independence. Because had the British not been forced out of Boston, we wouldn't have been euphoric and said, "Hey, let's declare independence." Who knows what would have happened? We might have been much more conciliatory to the British if they had in fact stayed there with a strong force and maybe even attacked and beaten Washington's army in a battle. Because Washington's army was hardly an army that could stand and fight in an attack against the British forces. So now you have Henry Knox, a guy that most people don't even know about, enabling the American Declaration of Independence. Absolutely fantastic. But guess what? The British don't give up. Most of you know that story. So now we end up in a situation where this guy, who is that? Exactly, George Washington. I just had a recent presentation to a group of folks who should know better, and they couldn't tell me who that was. And that was amazing. You know, I guess they expected the $1 bill portrait. But this is Washington. And let me tell you, Washington, time and time again, just like Henry Knox, enables the ability of us to, of American patriots to enable the Declaration of Independence and make that happen. And almost all on a shoestring, because when Knox was bringing all the cannons down and he was moving, he had very little help. Again, he started off with him and his brother. By the time he finished, he had most of New York, most of the New York militia helping him and other folks. They drove these cannon down hills and on sleds because the snow was some of the worst in the winters that anybody had experienced. So determination by Henry Knox was amazing. The ability of that to change Boston is an amazing story. And then the idea that we had the Declaration of Independence was fantastic. But 2 months or 3 months after that, in August, the British show up, and they show up with a vengeance, with the largest fleet and the greatest army that they'd ever assembled and will assemble until D-Day, 1944. And that's coming at us, and they are angry. And the king is going to show us who's in charge. Washington does his best. He opposes the British when they finally get on main land and fight, but our army is hardly prepared for this. We don't have the training, we don't have the equipment, and even though Knox has been able to get us some cannon, we don't have enough of anything. There are no foundries in the United States at that time, or in the 13 colonies, that can create cannon. The Americans immediately start to create those, but they didn't have them in 1775. So now it's 1776, and the British are on us, and they're on us hard, and they're beating us in every fight in New York. Washington barely escapes with the army in the middle of the night. A miracle story. Washington decides that he's going to try to withdraw from the island of Manhattan and get his army out before the British can fight this final fight. It's late at night. The British army surrounds the American forces except for the ability to get across the bay to New Jersey. The British fleet is there, and the British fleet can block anything that happens. So the British believe that we're totally surrounded. They got the British fleet behind us. They've got the British army in front. The next morning, Howe's going to come in and just finish him up. And Washington's able to get enough boats under a very capable leader called John Glover, who's a Marblehead fisherman, and he is all of his soldiers who joined and enlisted under his command were fishermen, and they usually carry pikes in the battle. And he takes all the boats they could find, and Glover is able to get the army across under the noses of the British fleet. Well, the Hessians, who happen to be working for the British at the time, which are German mercenaries, mostly from the state of Hesse in Germany, they are particularly upset. And one Hessian named Joachim Rall writes that he can't believe the entire British fleet was asleep while the Americans slipped by in rowboats. But it happened, and it wasn't bad weather. It was just dark and foggy. So the Americans slip out, but you don't win battles and you don't win your independence by not being defeated. You actually have to defeat the enemy. So Washington moves his army into New Jersey, and the British continue to chase him. Washington's army, which started off in 1775 with anywhere between 30 to 50,000 men or more, depending on how you count it, is now down to about 5,000 soldiers. And he is commanding a column of less than 2,000 as he's withdrawing through New Jersey. General Lee, who is also an American general, is commanding another column, and General Gates is commanding another column. So there are 3 American columns scattered so the British can't get them all, racing through New Jersey, trying to be one step ahead of the British so they're not defeated, captured, and conquered. So Washington comes to the Delaware River, and he goes to Glover, and he says, "Glover, get me across the river." And Glover says, "How am I going to do that without boats, sir? We need boats to cross the river." He says, "Glover, get my army across the river." So Glover goes out and finds boats. And he finds boats from one place in particular that were really helpful. There was a big coal works. It wasn't really an ironworks. But they hauled coal, and they would take this coal and they would dig the coal out of the ground and haul it in these big boats and then bring it in so it could be shipped out to other places in Europe. And so these coal boats were they were called Durham boats because the company's name was Durham. And these were big, basically barges that you could fit 20 or 30 men in if you wanted to, but it was designed to fit coal. And there were no seats, and they leaked at the bottom. I mean, they were full of water. They could get across the river, but they weren't exactly a pleasure cruise. So Glover gets all those boats, and he gets as many other boats as he can find, and he gets the army across just in the nick of time. So now they're on the Pennsylvania shore. It's cold. It's December. The British come up to the river. Howe says, all right, fine, we won't do anything here. We'll wait till the river freezes over, and then we'll bag them in February or maybe March. But right now, let's just take winter quarters. Colonel Rahl, commander of my Hessians, I want you to be at the point of honor. I want to post you, my toughest troops, my best troops, in Trenton. And so Rahl goes to Trenton. A leader must be determined to succeed. Most of you know a little bit about the Battle of Trenton and the Battle of Princeton that happened after it. But let me tell you, this story, if you study it in depth, is so amazing you won't believe it. The happenstance, the miracles that occurred, can only be from the hand of God. Truly, we should have been crushed. The British were at our throat. They had everything. We had nothing. When our soldiers are moving back through New Jersey, now the Continental Army of the United States, because we had declared our independence, they barely had shoes. Most didn't have bayonets. We had men with rifles and men with muskets. We had many different calibers. We had not enough powder. We had very few cannon. And as we were retreating, we had to leave a lot of our stores and a lot of our supplies. So the retreat became really bad. And when Washington finally crossed the river, it took everything that Henry Knox could do, who was now the commander of American artillery, to get those cannons across on those big Durham boats. In fact, John Glover had to make special platforms for them so he could put the cannon on them. So it takes time to do all this. And I don't know how many of you have ever done river crossing. I have. They're always difficult, and they never go according to schedule, and they never go the way you think they will. So Washington is now on the Pennsylvania side, and he's got all the boats, and luckily the British can't find many boats, and they decide that's okay. The rabble in arms over there is going to be defeated soon. It doesn't matter. Well, in December, several catastrophes hit the American cause. Not only is Washington now about the 16th of December is now over on the Pennsylvania side, but not only that, but his other two columns, he has no idea where they are. One led by General Lee finally shows up, led by General Sullivan. Washington says, "Where is General Lee?" Sullivan says, "Sir, he was captured or went over to the enemy, we're not sure." One night, while the army was camped, Lee decides he'd like to sleep in a cozy bed, so he goes off to a bar, an inn, where he has a few drinks, and then goes to sleep. Bannister Tarleton, a British officer who commands dragoons, wears a green coat, and is one of the people that, if you ever watched the movie The Patriot, was the main villain in The Patriot. Bannister Tarleton shows up based on a tip that Lee is there, captures General Lee in his underwear. So General Lee, who, by the way, did not like General Washington and kept sending letters to Congress that Washington was incompetent and should be relieved, is now a British prisoner. Sullivan at least showed up with his men, and Sullivan is a devoted leader of General Washington, devoted follower of General Washington, and a very good general. So Washington at least has his troops. Now he's waiting for General Gates. Well, General Gates finally shows up just before Christmas, and Gates shows up, and he has about 600 men with him because he's left others in different garrison spots along the Pennsylvania side of the river. And Gates is fuming mad because he thinks Washington should be relieved. He believes he should be the commander. This would be now, instead of Washington, it'd be Gatestown if Gates had his way. Gates believes that Washington is incompetent. So the day before Christmas, Washington has a council of war, which is what he did often. He would bring his leaders together and explain his intent, listen to them, and then decide on what the course of action and how they're going to move. And Gates gets in the meeting, and Washington says, "Sir, I would like to know your opinion. I've laid out our plans. What I want to do is I want to attack the Hessians on Christmas Day. I want to send this army across the river in a night river crossing. We'll attack the Hessians the next day, and we'll capture the whole lot of them. What do you think of my plan?" And Gates says, "You do not want to know." And Washington says, "Please, tell me." He says, "First, if you wish to win, if you wish to attack, you need an army. You don't have an army. Second, your army has to go in one direction. Your army always goes in the other direction. Should I go on?" "Oh, please, General, go on." Gates continues to tell Washington why it's impossible, why it will never be done. And then he says that Washington is an incompetent leader and that he doesn't believe he should be in command, that he is unfit for command, and that he is seeking annihilation in order to benefit his reputation rather than surrender. Washington immediately says, "That's enough," goes to his friend Alexander Hamilton, and says, who's a captain, and says, "Al, put your gun on him." His men stay, but he leaves. Escort him out. And Gates leaves that night on his horse looking for Congress. Washington also at that moment had a letter which he read everyone at the table, and it was from Congress. And Congress said, "Dear General Washington, we're leaving. Good luck. You're in charge." Washington is now dictator of the United States. The Congress has fled to Baltimore and other places. Many of them went home because they believed the British would cross the river, march on Philadelphia, and that was the end. And Gates had said, "The revolution is over." But Washington was unreasonable for liberty. And you should be too. Because that determination made all the difference. When Washington said, "We're going to attack the strongest force the British have, 1,500 Hessians in Trenton, who are in good quarters, well fed, with all their ammunition, led by one of their better commanders," it looked like an act of desperation, but it was an act of determination. Washington was unreasonable for the cause of liberty, and he knew that if they didn't win, it was over. And he was not going to see it over. So Washington decided to attack. The password was victory or death, and he meant it. And the attack at Trenton was a miracle. Christmas Day was cold and snowy. The snow was coming in sideways. The sleet and the rain was coming in. It rained for most of the day, then turned snowy and got bad. The pictures that you see, the paintings that you see, the famous painting that was done in the 1850s by a German artist of Washington crossing the Delaware, standing up and all, that's a very heroic, inspiring painting, and it's designed to be emblematic of the feeling of the crossing. The actual crossing, you couldn't have taken a picture. You could not have painted a photo, or painted a painting, because the snow was so bad. Now, Henry Knox is in charge of the river crossing. Colonel Glover is in charge of the boats. The boats have to row back and forth across the Delaware River to get 2,000 soldiers, horses, and cannon at night. Washington expects to get the entire army across at midnight, but he can't start until darkness because the British might see him. So he waits till dark, and the men start loading the boats. The snow gets horrible. It is freezing cold. Some of these men, remember, don't have shoes. Some of these are as young as 14 years old. What were you doing when you were 14? And they're carrying a musket. They get in the boats and they cross. First across is Washington with 80 Virginian soldiers from his best unit. He crosses, he secures the far side. Henry Knox is the river crossing commander. He's getting people going. Glover is moving people back and forth in the boats, but it's taking too much time. No river crossing ever goes as fast as you want. And this one was even worse because the weather was bad. Huge chunks of ice in the river. Washington's crossing takes much too much time. It's midnight, they're still not across. Washington, though, doesn't get out and rant and rave, doesn't micromanage. Every one of his leaders knows what's supposed to happen. They all know the plan. He's looking at his watch. He's sitting on a beehive. There's this beehive box that is described in the history books, where you put this box over a beehive when you want to harvest bees. But in the winter, of course, there are no bees, and this box is just here. But it's a place to sit because otherwise he's on the snow. His soldiers have made fires on the far side. most of us would say, oh my God, you're making fires. But the weather was so bad, no one could see the fires more than 3 or 4 feet. In fact, Colonel Glover's troops who are rowing, trying to get the Durham boats and all the other boats across the Delaware River, can't see where the crossing site is, and the stream is so fast that it's moving the river's moving them downstream. So Knox is at the other end, at the far shore. He crosses where Washington is, and he's on the other end. And in his booming voice, he's saying, over here, all night. And that's how Glover's guys come in and finally land and bring all the troops in. But it's way past midnight. It's almost 3 in the morning before they get everybody together. And so Sullivan and Knox and Nathaniel Greene, who's another general that you should know about, who joined him. He's a Quaker who decided to be a lapsed Quaker and fight. And fight for liberty, and he did well. Greene and Washington and Knox and Glover are on the other side, and Washington won't start the attack until Glover's gets all his men there, and Glover's men are with him. So it's 3 in the morning, and they're still just now ready to march, and it's going to be daylight at 6. And every morning before this, Colonel Rahl has had his men up at what we call stand to. There's stories that the Germans were all drunk because of Christmas. They were not. In fact, there's reports that the Germans didn't have a single drop. That's hard to believe. I'm sure there were some drops. But the point was, this is why they didn't have much, because Colonel Rahl had his men up at stand to every morning. That meant when the sun rose, he had his guys standing there with their weapons, in formation, locked and loaded, ready to go. Because at dawn is when the French and Indians attack. That's an old Ranger quote. At dawn is when the enemy attack. Okay, and Colonel Rahl, Joachim Rahl, he knew how to be a soldier. He knew that you were ready for attacks. Every morning he had that, except this morning. No, day after Christmas. Now the crossing happens at Christmas night, but he doesn't do it on Christmas, the day after Christmas. Why? Not because he was soft-hearted. He had a message that said, you're going to be attacked. The Patriots are going to attack you. A Tory. That's not a New Yorker. That's a guy who supports the British. The Tories, a Tory told Colonel Rahl with a note that said, you're going to be attacked. Be ready. Well, around 3 in the morning, a captain of New Jersey militia and 50 riders, with no understanding of Washington's attack, and no coordination by Washington, and no communication from Washington, decides they're going to go out and raise hell with the Hessians. So these guys go out and they find one house the Hessians are in. They poke their muskets through the window, blast away, and kill a few guys. The Hessians are all stirred up. It's like a hornet's nest. They're all out there. Rahl's up. They move out. Everybody gets online. They're trying to find these guys in this blizzard snowstorm. They race around for about 2 hours in this horrible weather. They're soaked from head to toe. Rahl comes back and says, okay, nobody will attack in this weather. Go to sleep. And so the Hessians go to sleep. In the meantime, Washington is moving his formation up. He gets word this attack was supposed to be a 3-pronged attack. There was supposed to be Washington's force and then a force to his left and a force to his right that was going to cross the river farther downstream so they could block Trenton from different areas. He gets the word, both of those crossings have failed. They have not been able to cross the river. The weather was too bad at those locations. Washington's determined. He got across. The other two guys, the other two attempts were valiant. They tried, but they couldn't. The water conditions were different. Everything was different there. So Washington doesn't have his full force. He's only got his force. The other two are not going to be able to support him. Then he gets a note from Sullivan, General Sullivan. Sir, the powder is wet. I don't think my men will be able to shoot. His generals look at him and say, look, sir, the other 2 attacks have failed. We're way behind time. We're never going to make this attack before daylight. Sullivan's telling us that the ammunition's wet, and you know it is, could look at the weather. We now have time to pull back. We can pull the whole army back across and get into Pennsylvania, and we can do it before they attack us, and we'll be safe. And Washington says, tell him to use the bayonet. We take Trenton. Think about it. I mean, there was nothing going right, but he was determined to succeed, and he knew the odds. He knew the foe he was going up against. He knew the measure of the fight. So he said, move out. They went down to a certain point, and then they found Jacob's Creek. Jacob's Creek is normally not a big deal. But because of the weather, Jacob's Creek was 6 feet down, full of water about 4 feet, and then 6 feet up, because it had just become a ravine eaten out by the water that had been falling and the snow and everything else. Henry Knox comes to this and goes, "Sir, I don't think I can get my cannon across this." He doesn't have an engineer corps. He doesn't have a bridge. And he's got the cannon. It took forever to get those cannon across. Everybody's wet, everybody's tired, and everybody's scared. And Washington says, "Henry, get the cannon across the creek." So Henry Knox takes the cannon apart and lowers him on ropes, and then trudges him up to the other side and brings him up on ropes and brings the cannon across the creek. They come to a fork in the road. The column continues to move. They find one outpost where the Hessians have a fire going. They can see the outpost through the very thick snow that is falling. And Washington goes to Alexander Hamilton and says, "Alexander, take some guys and take those guys out. It's an outpost." Alexander Hamilton rides up there with one other rider, and he has to do it quietly. Bursts in, there's 4 Hessians, they kill them all with a sword. Alexander Hamilton comes back all bloodied and said, "General, there were 4 of them, we're okay, they didn't fire a shot. Nobody sounded the alarm." Washington continues to move. As he's moving forward, he meets a captain of militia who was running around all night and had fired shots at the Hessians in their house. And the captain says, "Sir, good to see you. We gave him hell last night. Didn't know you'd be here." Washington says, "Sir, you have ruined us." Because he thinks now Rahl will be up and ready for them. Washington splits the force, one side along the river road, and he's taking the other side with Nathaniel Greene. The side that's on the river road is led by Hugh Mercer, and they come up from the back, and they find that there are no guards at all on Trenton. All of the Hessians are inside, getting ready to have a breakfast or sleeping. At 0800, Washington points to Knox. Knox positions his cannon. They fire. They take Trenton. They kill about 30 Hessians. They capture 900 and all the weapons they needed. And they don't lose a single man. 2 soldiers died of hypothermia on the far side as they crossed the river that night. But as they started to march, they didn't lose a single man in the fight. Now, several people were wounded, including James Monroe, who later becomes President of the United States, but no serious wounds. Tremendous victory. Unbelievable victory. Nobody slept for 2 days. Washington has barely had a chance to close his eyes. He sits down in a rocking chair inside one of the buildings next to the warm fire. And if any of you have ever been out in the middle of the night for 2 days and done that in the winter, and then suddenly you get next to a fire, he just went right to sleep. And nobody wanted to wake him. But finally, he wakes up about 15 minutes later. It was just a cat nap. And he says, "Okay, here's what we're going to do. Get the army ready to move." And they said, "What, sir? What, move? We're here. We've won. We've got the town. Let's warm up and relax." He says, "Are you kidding me?" He says, "Do you know what we've done? We've won this victory, but we haven't won the war. And those guys are mad, and they're going to come at us, so we got to get out of here." So he crosses the river again on the 26th at noon. Not one river crossing at night, but 2 river crossings. A river crossing at night and then a river crossing at noon that goes into the darkness and gets the whole army safe back across. Determination to succeed? My God, amazing. But that's not the whole story. There's more. Washington gets to the other side, but guess what? The enlistments are going to end on 30 December. All these guys have to do is say, "Thank you, we have done our best, our enlistments are up, and by the way, we haven't been paid." Washington's going to lose his whole army. So on the 30th, he grabs them, he gathers the army together, and he gets on his horse, and he stands in front of them and says, "For $10, for a bounty of $10, if any of you will volunteer to serve 30 more days and poise the firelock, meaning poise the musket, meaning hold the weapon and be ready to fight. You'll get a bounty of $10. Not a man moves forward. Finally, he says, he twirls a little bit on his horse and walks up and down the line and says, "Soldiers, we cannot spare you. If you will enlist for 30 more days, you will serve your country in a way that you'll never be able to serve it again." He's so compelling. He's so powerful in his ability to do this that one man steps forward, and then another, and then most of the army. And he says, "Good, we're crossing the river again." They get in the boats and they cross the river again. And they go back to Trenton. Now, the British are really mad. They've lost their best regiment. Actually, it was a combination of several regiments at Trenton. Rahl is killed in the fight. All the colonels of the Hessian regiment are killed in the fight. They fought hard. But the British are mad. So Howe, who is safe and nice and warm in New York City, enjoying the pleasures of a young patriot girl, he, who happened to be his mistress for most of the war, which is another story, he sends Cornwallis, General Cornwallis, down and says, "Get that guy." Cornwallis says, "No, wait a minute, sir, I was going on leave. I was supposed to be going home to see my wife." He says, "Right, canceled, go." Cornwallis is really mad. Cornwallis gets his army and he finds out that Washington's in Trenton, so he races down there with as many men as he can find, and he outnumbers Washington about 6-1. What's really interesting here is how, if you study this in depth, how Washington's light infantry forces delayed the arrival of Cornwallis's force so that Cornwallis's men didn't get to the main defense line along Assunpink Creek, where Washington had set up a Bunker Hill-like defense, until late in the evening. The British tried 4 times to cross the bridges, couldn't get across the creek. Washington had his soldiers set up perfectly. Henry Knox had zeroed in his cannons, so when they came across, they got canister. The story was that there was more red on that bridge than just uniforms. It was filled with British dead. It became nightfall. General Cornwallis said, "We'll wait till the morning and then we'll bag the fox." And one of his officers said, "If I know Washington, he won't be there in the morning." And Howe says, "How can he be? We've got him against a hill, and behind him is the Delaware River. There's nowhere for him to go." But Washington was determined to succeed. So Washington set up his defenses on Assunpink Creek in a way that night that made it look like the whole army was there, while he took the entire army minus 500 guys he left behind to act as if the army was there, and took the rest of the army and went through a path that he only knew and a local farmer had told him, and he brought the entire army around Cornwallis's force without them knowing it, and headed to Princeton. Because at Princeton, he knew there was stores and ammunition and a small British garrison, and that British garrison happened that next morning when he's heading toward Princeton. That British garrison happens to be moving out, heading toward Trenton. Anyway, Cornwallis is back in Trenton. The morning comes, no Americans. They charge, empty pits. Cornwallis is livid. He's so upset. He's trying to move north now. As he tries to move north, he's being harassed and shot at by the same light infantry that got him so slowly into Trenton. In the meantime, Hugh Mercer, and many of you may have heard of Hugh Mercer, a great American patriot who fought in the Battle of Culloden in 1745 with the Scots, found out that Scotland wasn't going to be free anymore and went to America to enjoy liberty, became good friends of George Washington during the French and Indian War, and he was also a doctor, therefore Mercer Hospital. So Hugh Mercer is leading the group. He's leading riflemen, and they bang right into the British who are trying to leave Princeton to go down to Cornwallis because they don't know that Washington isn't there. Mercer is immediately caught in the middle of the fight and killed. He's clubbed He's mortally wounded. He dies a few days later, but he's clubbed and banded because they think he's Washington. And the men he's with fight desperately, but they have rifles because they were riflemen. They didn't have bayonets. So they're clubbing the enemy, but they can't fight the bayonets, and the British have muskets and bayonets, and it's an uneven fight. Washington sees this and charges forward. The guys follow behind him because Washington's out in front. Washington gets in front of the British and his own ranks, and his men go to poise their muskets. He orders the fire, and the commander in charge of that said all he saw was smoke. Washington's in the middle. There's British. They fired. We fired, and there's smoke. And he says, I did not want to look because for sure Washington was dead. The smoke clears. Washington's swirling his saber, and he says, get them, boys! And they attack. Absolutely amazing. Why he wasn't killed, we'll never know. The fact that Washington was out front all the time, leading his men, determined to succeed, and never was even wounded. Whereas people around him were killed and his coat was filled with bullet holes and other things, is incredible, and I swear, the hand of God. Because in this case and many other cases, how could he have possibly lived? But he did. And he always put himself forward, and his men followed him, and they won. They took Princeton. Well, there's so many other stories that I could go into. Benjamin Franklin, of course, you know him in the writing of the Declaration of Independence. You want to talk about a good story about how to get three people to work together who are totally different. This is a story. A leader must coach, teach, and mentor. If you teach, coach, and mentor your folks, you can do incredible things. Ben Franklin did that. In fact, most of our Declaration of Independence is because of his teaching, his coaching, and his mentoring. This guy, anybody know who he is? Close. No. Excellent. Daniel Morgan. Daniel Morgan is a man you need to know. This is a frontiersman. He was a wagoneer during the French and Indian War. He was pushing a wagon up a hill, doing his best to get this wagon up a hill when a young British officer came up to him and said, "You rowdy colonial, move faster," and started to whip him. We're Americans. The one thing you can count from Americans is we resent authority in all shapes and sizes at all time. No matter who you are, we resent authority. You tell me to do something, I will not like that. I may do it, and if I'm a good follower, I'll understand. But if you just tell me and your tone is wrong, and this tone was wrong, he was getting whipped. So what do you think Daniel Morgan did? He pulled him off the horse and beat him to a pulp. The British gave him about 400 lashes for that. And he said, should have killed any other man, and he said the British owed him one more lash. So when the American Revolution happened, he joined the cause. He fought in the Battle of Quebec. He ended up getting captured and finally getting paroled. He led Morgan's riflemen in the Battle of Saratoga, which won the Battle of Saratoga. He was critical to that, him and his riflemen. And then he fought the Battle of Cowpens. And at Cowpens, this was, if you saw the movie Patriot, this was the final battle in the movie. I know, you didn't know that. But Mel Gibson played a role that was a combination of Francis Marion and Daniel Morgan. Daniel Morgan knew how to use militia. He knew how to use soldiers. He never asked of them anything more than they could do. He knew how to delegate authority. He told his militia this, look, militia, when they fired, always ran. They would fire a few shots and then run. So he said, this is what you do. Fire 2 shots for old Dan and then run to the next line. Fire 2 more shots and then fall behind the Continentals. And that's what they did. Bannister Tarleton has his army going up against Daniel Morgan, the bad guy. Bannister Tarleton sees the militia withdraw. They're on the run. Go get them, boys. They go forward. The militia fire 2 more rounds. British lose some more guys. But then they run. Go get them. We can get them. And then they come over a hill. And as they come over the hill on the reverse slope, there's a solid line of Continentals. And Morgan says, fire. And it's an amazing thing. And then, by mistake, the Continentals withdraw. And Morgan turns around and says, are you beaten? And the commander says, sir, are men who could march this well beaten? No. And he says, well, turn and fire. And at this point, the British are in full charge, all broken in formation. And they're coming at them full charge. And the Americans turn as a unit, load, and they're already loaded, and fire. And it just drops them. And that wins the battle. And from there, it's a complete rout. And Bannister's force is completely wiped out. They're either captured or no longer effective. And because of this, Cornwallis ends up in Yorktown. By small things, great deeds were done. By leadership, amazing things happen. So, you know this picture of Washington? A leader pulls, bosses push. Washington never pushed, he pulled. It's a huge difference. Again, this is my favorite picture of Washington. The determination on that face, that's leadership. Lastly, a leader doesn't shine, but reflects. If I had more time, I would tell you the story about how our republic was saved again by George Washington at Newburgh, and how his actions made sure that the American army would never go against Congress or against the American people or eventually against, the Constitution. We didn't have a Constitution then. We only had a Declaration of Independence. But Washington made the difference, and he made the difference with a set of glasses, and it's a wonderful story. So here it is. These are the things I want you to take away from today. A leader chooses courage. Remember, fear is a reaction. Courage is a decision. A leader must learn to follow to learn to lead. A leader must be determined to succeed. A leader must teach, coach, and mentor. A leader must delegate authority. A leader pulls, bosses push. And a leader doesn't shine, but reflects. If it's all about you, something's wrong. It's always, always about your team. I think that this is leadership. This is my definition. I challenge each of you to write your own definition at some point. Tomorrow, after this is a little foggier in your mind, take some time and write down for a few minutes, a paragraph or so, what you think leadership is. Because if you can define it, if you can do that, you can start to measure it. I believe leadership is a sacred trust. It's the art of influence. It's the ability to motivate, inspire, and impel people to accomplish a mission. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
So we have a few minutes for a few questions. So if there are questions, you just raise your hand and wait for the microphone. So there's one in the back, sir. Just state your name and affiliation.
Yeah, I'm Dino Drudy. I'm a citizen who's interested in what history tells us. One could analogize this to very recent events where the Tea Party inspired the House of Representatives did what could arguably be some of these same things. This seemingly suicidal shutdown, for example. But the public's reaction was a very different reaction from the public of that time and even of Washington's men. Does that suggest that perhaps the spirit that gave birth to us as a country has, as the cynic Lord Woodhousley might suggest with his Democracy's Last 200 Years, that it is or is in danger of being a spent force?
That's an excellent question, and I appreciate that. It's a question that all of us should ask now and then. America always seems to be a few seconds toward midnight. As I said earlier, if you look back at our history, we almost lost it over and over again during the Revolution. We almost never had it. We almost lost it again as we were trying to form a constitution. We almost lost it again as we were, again, opposed by the British in 1812. You can go all the way through to World War II, where fascism could have destroyed us, where communism could have wiped us out. I believe that people have to be unreasonable for liberty. Now, that doesn't mean that you're an unreasonable person in the sense that you can't deal with other folks and can't get along and can't make compromises when you have to. But there's certain things, values that count. So I go back to the American Revolution for my values, and I see there why these men and women, under extraordinary times, were able to pull out liberty out of the abyss. We have to do the same. We have to have the power today of soul and spirit not to give up, to fight the good fight. I assure you that when you're in the middle of those fights in the American Revolution or in any fight, there are a lot of people that never think you're going to make it. There's a lot of people that think, oh, there's more reasonable courses of action. Why didn't we just make peace with the British? Why couldn't we have just become a sort of a softer colony? Sometimes you got to fight. By the way, I come from Texas. And in Texas, we see things a little bit differently sometimes. So I wouldn't think that everyone in the country feels that standing up for what you believe in was wrong. It's wonderful if you win every fight. Washington didn't win every fight. But if you don't fight, you lose them. Sir?
Just, we've got one more question in the queue after that. I think.
Milton Grenfell. I want to commend you on making history come to life. And
you, sir.
it seems to me that the way history has been taught for the past decade or so in our public schools, it's not that way. It's very dry and a certain amount of propaganda laced in there for various pet causes of the decade. But you know, leadership is about telling a good story, I think, the little bits you gave of Washington. It seems to me that young people in this country are not being raised with stories. Therefore, they are lacking leadership or being led to be good citizens. And I would like your observations about that, and if you agree with that, and if so, what could be done about reintroducing the sort of narrative sense of history that you so well gave us.
Well, thank you for those kind comments, sir. I think that's a truly important question, and I'll ask you to do this. Pass the torch. All of you have such great experiences if you're over 30. And if you're under 30, you have great experiences you want to have so you can read. You know, there's only so much you can experience directly. Most of the things in life you have to experience virtually. You have to understand them by reading books or hearing other people's stories. So pass the torch. It doesn't matter whether you're what age you are. I mean, talk to people and tell them what you believe in. And if you care about something, like you care about liberty, you care about our country, read some of the stories and then be a storyteller. I mean, there are so many wonderful things that we owe those who came before us. I'm writing a new book now called 7 Leadership Lessons of D-Day. And every time I study these stories and I go into depth in these individual stories of leaders who had to do extraordinary things, all I can think about is how we have to earn it. You know, there's so much we are given. And if we don't earn it, if we don't really try, you know, to tell other people about it and earn what they gave us, we'll lose it. This is the greatest place on earth. And if you don't keep it that way, if we don't all collectively keep it that way and do the things that the Heritage Foundation stands for and that all of us believe in, if we don't do that, we will lose it. They could have lost it in the American Revolution. They could have lost it. We could have lost it in the Civil War. We could have lost it in World War II. We could have surrendered right after 9/11 and just done nothing, and maybe, who knows. We're Americans. We can do anything. All we have to do is put our minds to it and lead. Thank you. Sir.
Yep, and I think that'll be our last question.
And by the way, I apologize for speaking so long. I could go on, and I know I cut off some of the questions, so I apologize.
I just wanted to say thank you for talking about Henry Knox and John Glover, who are probably 2 of our greatest American heroes that nobody knows about.
Yes, sir.
Someone else that falls into that category who showed extraordinary leadership abilities during the Revolution was General John Stark.
Yes.
And I wondered if you just had any insight into General Stark.
Well, you know, when I had to make a book, 7 Leadership Lessons, you're stuck with that number. So and besides, you have to make it concise. When you're telling stories, you can't tell the story of everything. You have to tell concise stories. So I had to choose. I mean, Francis Marion, Nathaniel Greene, there's so many others, John Paul Jones, there's so many others I want to tell the stories of. So maybe I'll write another book someday about the American Revolution. But my next one's on D-Day, and but it's a great question, and it's always tough for an author. I had much more material, and I had to cut it down. But it was a wonderful journey to learn. I feel like I know these guys. I feel like I was there with them, and it's just amazing if you study in depth what you can learn. I want to thank you all so much for your kind attention and for all you do in your various ways to keep our nation and our republic alive. Thank you.
And there are books available outside, and I'm sure John will stick around if you have questions or if you have your book signed. So.